Thank you.
Wow, hello everyone. I'm Leah Kelly. I'm the Executive Director of Adolescent Consultation Services. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our very first virtual Heal, Grow, and Thrive event. I hope you enjoyed the performance by the incredibly talented Matilda Heckler. Matilda is a first-year student at Berklee College of Music, and I'm sure if we were all together, she would be getting a standing ovation. That was phenomenal. I want to thank our board of directors for hosting this evening and for their loyal support of the work we do. I also want to thank our generous corporate sponsor, East Cambridge Savings Bank, whose staff were also instrumental in processing our PPP government loan application, working around the clock for so many small businesses facing financial instability. And very special thanks to those individuals who so generously sponsored this event, which include Liz Keating, Fran and Hugh Miller, and an anonymous sponsor. And I want to acknowledge and thank our highly talented and dedicated staff who do such important and challenging work every day. And a final heartfelt thank you goes to Robin Eastwood, our Director of Development, who accomplished the seemingly impossible by simply getting us here tonight in an entirely new way. While I know most of us would prefer to see everyone in person, sometimes adversity brings opportunity. For instance, there are some people who were able to join us tonight who otherwise would not have been able to attend an in-person event for a variety of reasons, one of which is because they don't live in Massachusetts. But tonight will look pretty different than in the past. The work our clinicians are doing looks different too. The need for mental health services for kids remains huge, and all the more critical during the current health crisis. Kids are incredibly isolated and families are stretched to the max in every possible way. We look forward to updating you on how ACS has adapted these past 8 months. We also look forward to having a deeper conversation with our keynote speaker, Dr. Charmain Jackman, about racial and ethnic disparities in the fields of juvenile justice and mental health, which is the other crisis facing many of the families we serve. ACS staff are helping out behind the scenes tonight. So if you have a comment or question, please type it in the chat field and we will respond as quickly as we can. The Q&A box is for later following Dr. Jackman's remarks. As an agency that serves court-involved children and adolescents in Middlesex County, it is wonderful to have mayoral representation from 2 of the cities in which our juvenile courts are located. Thank you, Cambridge Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui and Framingham Mayor Yvonne Spicer for joining us to officially welcome us this evening. First, please welcome Mayor Siddiqui.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. It's such an honor to be here with you this evening. That performance was just amazing. So thank you so much for that very, very moving performance. So I am honored to be here. I want to start off by thanking the ACS board members, the staff, the donors, as well as everyone who's joined this discussion to learn more about ACS and hear from Dr. Charmaine Jackman. So I'll be very brief. I'll say a few words. During my term so far, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, I've made it a priority to raise awareness about mental health supports and help destigmatize mental health illness by engaging our community in conversation and connecting people with resources and support systems. What I've learned during our work in addressing mental health of young people through our public schools is that young people process feelings of stress, anxiety, trauma, and a multitude of other emotions in very different ways than adults. And if you can compound those feelings with the additional layer of being involved in the juvenile justice system, the need for mental health supports is even greater. And I've seen, as of many of you, how our young people who enter this revolving door of the court system without that proper care, that attention, and that investment, and what that does to their lives long term. So ACS's commitment, their work on connecting youth with appropriate resources to overcome obstacles due to trauma, family difficulties, and mental health issues is so profound and critical to the overall well-being of our young people involved in the juvenile justice system, their families, and the community as a whole. As you may know, mental health services and that access to those services has been identified as a top-tier need in the city of Cambridge. So we're really grateful to the work that ACS does and continues to do, and always look for ways to partner. As you've heard, the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm sure you're here tonight, this has just exacerbated the need for mental health supports. So I'm just really truly thankful to ACS and the work that you do. So thank you so much for having me this evening.
Thank you so much, Mayor Siddiqui. Your remarks are just really resonate, and we just really appreciate that. And next, we welcome Mayor Yvonne Spicer.
Good evening, everyone. I am so honored to be here with you this evening. For those of you who are just getting the chance to know who I am, I'm Dr. Yvonne Spicer, and the mayor of the great city of Framingham. I am honored to be here tonight with my fellow mayor, Mayor Siddiqui, who is my sister in service, and I am so proud of the work that she is doing in her city, as well as ACS board members, staff, and donors. All of you, the guest, as well as this evening's keynote speaker, my sister in Christ, Dr. Charmaine Jackman. Pleasure to have you be on the same docket as you this evening. This year's services that are provided by the Adolescent Consulting Services have come to a sharp focus, and it's largely due to the experiences that we have had over the last several months, and this has been a very trying time. Reflecting on how we, with our age and wisdom, have found the last year to be extremely difficult and confusing, as well as frightening. Now imagine how much more those emotions and internal conflicts must be for our children. Being a former high school teacher, and administrator, I so know this age grouping and how fragile time is for them. And also when we're dealing with a pandemic, how more difficult that can be as they experience life and traverse through adolescence, compounded by some of the traumas associated with this pandemic. The importance of public health and mental health is social health. Social health is so critically important. And it's also important in terms of shaping identity of these precious young people, which is why I'm grateful for this work. I'm grateful for all of the work that ACS does in order to ensure that all of our next generation of young people are not only healthy in mind, body, and spirit, but they also can see their way through a difficult, challenging situation. People like Dr. Jackman in ACS bring light where there's darkness. And the notion of how cultural identity and racial identity and disparities of mental health impact our adolescents is brought to the forefront. I feel that this is a respected platform that I am looking forward to hearing Dr. Jackman this evening, and an opportunity to look at opportunities for change, to push the needle on mental health and making sure that the resources are available in order to serve our youth. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for being contributors to this wonderful, wonderful entity, and for your support at every level for the Adolescent Consultation Services and Fall Fundraiser. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Mayor Spicer. I so appreciate your remarks. We are now going to share a short video with you. If you didn't know much about ACS and what we do, hopefully watching the video changed that. I'm going to share with you how our work has changed since the onset of the pandemic back in March. Ominously, Friday the 13th was the very last day that we were in the courts before they closed. Since that time, we pretty quickly were able to shift to the use of telehealth platforms and other HIPAA compliant technology so that our staff could resume their evaluations and treatment sessions via Zoom. While in-person meetings are always better, being able to shift to virtual work has actually enabled some families to have better access to our services than before. So obstacles like transportation and childcare are dramatically reduced. We have purchased and distributed all categories of PPE countywide, and we have brought limited staff back on site. As we monitor the status of COVID-19 infection rates in our catchment areas, we will continue to adjust our staffing plan as needed. As we prepared to host our first virtual event, I will admit that it was completely daunting. Like so many of you, I have spent the past 8 months glued to Zoom screens, and I've been both a witness and perpetrator of awkward technical moments, such as accidental unmuting, unfortunate camera angles, curious children and pets, and just all the things. So I could not envision pulling off a virtual event with all the technology, moving parts, risk of glitches. So I wondered several times, maybe it was better to just play it safe and not even to try it. But it occurred to me that this is exactly what we ask of our young clients and their families every day. To face overwhelming challenges, to be brave, to accept lots of help, to try things they've never tried before, to not be afraid to make mistakes, to value progress over perfection, and to have faith in themselves. In addition to our response to the health crisis, I would like to share our response to the racial violence across the country. A great deal of internal dialogue within ACS has been held about how we as individuals and as an organization can be a more intentional ally and accomplice in combating racism and social injustice. We are committed to turning up the volume on the voices and lived experience of the young people we serve, and how the experience of racial trauma is integral to how youth of color and their families interact with the juvenile justice, child welfare, and mental health systems. To this end, we have formed a staff-led working group, Nurturing Ideas, an acronym for inclusivity, diversity, equity, awareness, and social justice, which is tasked with exploring a range of steps we can take to ensure that our practices, from the clinical to the operational, are aligned with our values as individuals, helping professionals, and as an organization. We are honored to have Dr. Charmaine Jackman as our keynote speaker this year. Dr. Jackman is a licensed psychologist of Barbadian heritage with over 23 years in the mental health field. After earning a doctoral degree in psychology from the University of Southern Mississippi, Dr. Jackman relocated to Boston to train at Boston Children's Hospital. She then went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship in forensic psychology at Mass General Hospital. She worked in the juvenile court clinics for 8 years and was instrumental in leading seminars on culturally and linguistically responsive forensic evaluations. Dr. Jackman is founder and CEO of InnoPsych, Inc., an organization on a mission to disrupt disparities in racial disparities in mental health. Her goal is focused on changing the face of therapy by ensuring that anyone who wants therapy can find a therapist who understands their cultural background. Dr. Jackman will be able to take a couple of questions after her remarks. If you have a question for her, please submit it to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It is now my sincere pleasure to introduce Dr. Charmaine Jackman.
Good evening. Oops, there we go. Hi, good evening, everyone. Hope you are doing well. So this is a virtual format, so I am getting used to this. I'm going to share my screen and just go over my remarks. And I look forward to having a quick engaging dialogue afterwards. So thank you again, Leah, and for inviting me to share some of my work that I've been doing that's really been amplified over this last 8 months. Thank you to all the staff, the board members, and to all the attendees here. I look forward to having a rich discussion. I typically do these conversations in at least an hour and a half, so I'm going to condense it really tightly for tonight, but it is an honor. I'm always privileged and honored to be able to talk about racism and what we need to do to disrupt racial disparities in the different systems that we're working in. So I like to bring the elders into the room. And I was saying to Leah and Robin the other day that a lot of my words that I use with InnoPsych are learning, growing, thriving. And so it's so fitting that the theme for your fundraiser tonight is heal, grow, thrive. So Maya says that I can't replicate Maya, but I'm gonna try. My mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. And I try to live by those words. I think they're very powerful, but it also really directs my work, and it really speaks to how I enter and engage in the work that I do, even when talking about race. And I know talking about race can often bring up lots of emotions because they're conversations that we're not really socialized to discuss and engage with. They are complicated and layered. But my philosophy is the more that we have those conversations, the easier they become. And you can bring humor and compassion to those conversations as well. So, I'm not going to go into a lot of the data because we know the data, and I think that's part of the conversation I really want to have tonight, is that we know the systems are in many ways harming our youth. We know that youth of color in particularly more impacted by the school to prison pipeline. I have a unique vantage point because I'm a psychologist. I work in a school setting. I've worked in the courts. I continue to do work with the courts as well. And so I live in these systems where our children, our youth are most impacted. And so this is very personally meaningful to me as well. So what do the systems tell us? We know the data, and I love this graphic. There's a lot of information on here, so I know it's maybe hard to see some of it, but there are a few points that I want to highlight. We know that the school to prison pipeline disproportionately impacts youth of color. And this little box over here really speaks to who's impacted. That's very clear. We know that when schools have school police or police officers in schools, you're more likely to have arrest rates of our youth. We know that youth and have mental health challenges, and those often also exacerbate their functioning in schools, and they are more likely to then be diverted, particularly our youth of color, to the juvenile justice system versus mental health supports and treatment, like ACS. And we know, right, we know that the juvenile justice system, as I mentioned before, that youth of color, poor youth, are disproportionately represented in the courts. And that was my experience when I worked in the courts for over 8 years. I know, the discrepancy in students who are at private schools who have different opportunities than students in public schools. But I also see the impact of those students who get diverted to the courts system. And so we know that it's not right. We know it's not fair. We know it's not equitable. And we find ourselves continuing to do the same things that we're doing because the system is invested in the way it's set up, right? It's invested in holding on to the status quo. So how do we disrupt that? How do we take the information that we know and really change that outcome? Those are questions I want us to ask ourselves. I also want to look at the information that we have around prevention, mental wellness, trauma-informed. You know, these are not just buzzwords, right? There's science and data that tells us these are things that help youth, right? These are things that impact youth. We know that the adolescent brain is under construction, that it's developing. And so having more severe punishments and crimes for young people does not take that into account. We are aware of restorative justice practices that provide essential tools for youth to build communication skills and repair harms that have been done. We know the impact of understanding trauma, particularly racial trauma, and how that impacts behavior. That was very, very, very beautifully highlighted in the video that was just seen. So we know these things work or help or can inform our decisions and our practices. And somehow we manage not to really use them to challenge the system and the status quo. So again, I'm asking, what can we do differently? In 2020, we've been asked, not asked, but we've been forced to stop and pause and think about our work, our practice, and think about ways that we might want to do that differently, right? Due to COVID-19 and now the racial pandemic, we've had to really take a step back and really stop the way that we've been doing and changing up our practices. Over the last 8 months, I've been doing lots of workshops around anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, all of that. And one of the questions that I often ask people is, when did they first think about or learn about their race? When did they become aware of that race? And I hear people say sometimes in college, particularly for white folks, right? Sometimes in college or much later on in life. I've been in conversations where I've had colleagues, white colleagues say to me, you know, they've been awoken, right? The pervasiveness and the conversation that's continuing has made them really stop and think about what can they do differently. And I appreciate those reflections. And at the same time, it's also frustrating because Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color have had to deal with these conversations every day, right? We don't get a break. And so my call to action for folks is, and the call I think for the anti-racism framework is telling us we need to take action, that we can no longer sit by and see systems that are harmful to our young people and continue to operate the same way. We know the system, again, is built to maintain the system and maintain the way that it operates. And so we really have to think about and do things to challenge and disrupt. We have to be brave. We have to do that ongoing work to challenge and change the system. We have to do the personal work. We have to do the interpersonal work, the institutional work, and the societal work. And every organization, every system is being called to that change, to make those changes. One of the things that I often think about, I was born in the 70s, so but when I always think about the civil rights movement of the 60s, and I always question, what would I do if I were born and living in that time? And, I think it's a question that I can't answer honestly, because I always want to think like, you'll do the right thing, you'll march, you'll get behind, get between the hoses, you'll be radical almost. And so we're in this place where I think this is like civil rights 2.0. 2020 is our civil rights of our time, for me anyway, in my generation. And so I'm asking people, like, when you look back at 220 in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, what will you say that you've done to disrupt the racial disparities? What will you say that you've done to disrupt racism? What would you say you've done to disrupt the system? And so that's a question I really want us to kind of think about and wrestle with as we continue this conversation tonight and beyond. So I have 4 points that I want to share with you, and hopefully I'm within my time. I can get very involved in this conversation. So I'm going to share 4 things that I think you can help think that you can do. So sometimes we get faced with what is the thing that I can do, and we can get stuck in that place, or stuck feeling like the job is too big or the work is too large. It feels hopeless. It feels helpless. I can't do it all. But my challenge is that you can do something. And so I'm going to give you 4 options that you can choose from. 1 is call out racism when you see it and when you hear it. So my sister and I am very proud to be able to do this. We are different generations, but we are collaborating on a project to really educate and kind of redefine this whole idea of calling out. So calling out, if you're not familiar with it, is the idea of that you're bringing awareness and education to racially biased statements or behaviors that often cause harm to people. You might hear words like microaggression or pretty racist acts, right? We've seen, for example, the Amy Cooper in the Central Park incident, right? That's a microaggression. She got called out, but she got canceled, right? She lost her job as a result of that. Our idea is really, and so calling out can often have this very negative adversarial tone. And what we really want to do, we want to really think about calling out as an opportunity to educate and and create awareness about your behavior and actions. And these are things for all of us to do, right? And part of that also, the calling out or calling in, is really also understanding how to receive feedback and how to respond to feedback graciously. So I'll quickly go through this because I can spend, again, lots of time on this. But as you see on the right hand side, you see calling out and calling in. And calling out is where racist statements or behaviors happen in a public space. And you take time in that moment, usually, to address that behavior and to provide education about what could be used different or what could be done differently. Calling in is a more private action. It's more one-to-one. Canceled, as we know, people kind of lose their job. There's often on that side, there's no opportunity or very little opportunity for education and growth. And then the silent regret is when you're in a situation where you notice something, but you didn't say something. And people often carry that because they wish they would have spoken up and said something. So my goal and my hope is, how do we generate and create a culture of calling out that's really focused on education and awareness and not about shaming. The second opportunity or action step that you can take is about interrogating whiteness. And this is for both white people and people of color as well. And this is really to examine and challenge the idea that white people customs and culture are the standard, are norm, and that they are superior. And it really requires understanding and reflecting on identity, on your social identity. Again, whenever I do these workshops, I invite people to reflect on their racial identity, to talk about when they first became aware of their whiteness. What do they like about their whiteness, right? Sometimes those are hard questions, but it's important to answer because they are there. And it's really important to make yourself aware. Otherwise, we're acting on blind spots, we're acting on bias, and we're not challenging. One quick example that I like to use, I'm pretty sure everyone has read a children's book at some point in their life. And I like using this because I have young children, we're constantly reading. And as a parent who is very aware of diversity and wanted to make sure my children see themselves in the books that we read, one aspect and one example and where we see whiteness really permeate is in children's books. And this diagram, it might be hard to see, but I'll just quickly share some of the data. So this breaks down the main characters in books. And so you see 73% This is in 2015, were white. One of the most disheartening is the next statistic, which says that 12.5% of the characters featured animals or inanimate objects like cars and toys and trucks. There are more books featuring animals and inanimate objects than there were featuring Black children, Asian children, Latinx children, and Native American children. So that really speaks to the dehumanizing of children, that animals and inanimate objects are more featured in children's books than other children of color. And so that's a way to interrogate whiteness, right? And I do the same with movies. When we're reading or we're talking, I'm raising these issues with my children so that they're aware. And we're always, and they're probably really annoyed with me because they probably just want to read what they want to read, but it's important for me to make them socially conscious as well. The third point that I want to highlight is practicing allyship. And I really want to just highlight allyship is not about a performance or a statement. It's not static. It's an ongoing practice that you have to continually be checking and learning and unlearning things that you may have thought are true. It's about stepping up and speaking up and not relying on people of color to do the hard work, the emotional labor of racism and challenging racism. So these are 5 steps. Unrest, right? So unrest, uncover history and implicit bias. I am constantly learning the history, particularly as someone who was not born and raised in this country. I'm constantly learning and interrogating. Reflecting on our own racial and other identities. We talked about that as well in terms of interrogating whiteness, or understanding our own identities and how that plays, how those interact with white identities. Educating yourself about race and racism and whiteness. Sacrificing power and privilege. And I think one of the most important pieces is taking action and speaking up. And then the last one I wanted to really highlight is really about engaging the community. So it's really sometimes hard to see when people are creating solutions for problems for a community where the community is not, the people from the community are not at the table, they're not involved. And one of the things I want to highlight is that people in the community have solutions for their problems, they just need access to resources. And so making sure that whatever you're doing, that you're engaging the community and you're lifting the voices of those who are most directly impacted by the problem or the social issue. I want to quickly have Robin share a video that's a really great example, I think, of engaging a community in resolving and solving and addressing their problems. And then we'll close out my part. So Robin, can you?
One day I was just around the back of my yard doing some chores and I heard a lot of noise. And I went to my gate to look to see what it was, and I saw children running up and down wild, a lot of kids, some riding bicycles, others playing different games. And I was like, wow, and this was school time. I know that if it wasn't the COVID, they would have been in class. So as a teacher, I took responsibility. I felt responsible because I was like, because we're not able to be with them, they're out there doing that. And I felt sad. And I knew that I had to do something about it. Then the thought came to me. Paint blackboards in this community, put up the work at a designated spot and let parents know. So everybody can just come and access it. Take their phone, take a picture and take it back inside their room for their children. And that's what I did.
Early every morning, Mrs. McCoy Phipps and her assistants go to different communities where they religiously write the day's lesson on the community blackboard. The devout teacher says the COVID-19 pandemic has only increased her resolve to reach as many students as possible.
No, it's called for teachers to be critical thinkers and proactive. And I can't let my children down. It doesn't matter if they're not members of my class. I just know definitely that I am responsible for the nation's children, so I'll have to do something about it. Behind every zinc fence and board lies a lot of children with great potential and ability. Equal access to education. You don't know where these great children are. You just have to make sure that nobody's left behind, hold their hands and bring them. Every child can learn, every child must learn.
Thank you for sharing that. That was said in Jamaica. So again, how do we engage communities in resolving their problems? And I think, again, thinking about the systems that we're trying to challenge and break down and disrupt, how do we engage the communities that are most impacted by juvenile justice and the incarceration of youth in the conversation? Just want to share a little bit about, in terms of mental health, and a little bit about InnoPsych and the work that I am doing. Again, I saw a social issue, and part of it is like not having, people of color not having access to therapists of color. We represent, therapists of color represent less than, let's say about 15% of all therapists out there. But they're hard to find because there's no central location. And so my goal is to really centralize how people can access therapeutic supports. And also it's about really promoting emotional healing. There are a lot of negative messages around mental health, and a lot of the work I'm doing, particularly during this COVID time, is really emphasizing the importance and the necessity of healing, not just for us, but for the next generation. And so that's a little bit about InnoPsych. So my question and my challenge for you is, what will you do? What is one action step that you will take this week, because they have to be immediate. You can't put it off till next month. What is one action step that you will take this week to disrupt racism in your sphere? Whether it's your professional practice, your personal life, what is one action step that you will do? Thank you. And that's how you can connect with me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jackman. I love that you end with a question. That's so many insights. It's a lot to metabolize. I was reflecting on a conversation I had with my daughter, who is watching right now, about the fact that it's predominantly white dolls that are available. So I'm going to continue to have that conversation with her.
There's a company called Fusion Dolls that really is bringing dolls of color. I'm just going to pop it in there because you just put it out there.
Thank you. Thank you. So we do have a few questions. We have a couple of minutes. Thank you. You may have sort of answered this, but I'll read it anyway. What are some ways that mental health practitioners can become part of the solution?
Yeah, I actually have a friend who says that our clinical practice has to be anti-racist, right? And so one of the things that I've noticed that mental health professionals often, I don't know, I think they don't see it as their role in their therapy practice to challenge and bring these issues into the room, or to address the issues when they come into the clinical room. And so my challenge to my colleagues is that, yes, anytime a client comes in and is making racist statements or racist behaviors, you have to challenge that. And it is absolutely part of the work that you do. It is part of the work. Our clients come in for many different reasons, and we support them, whether they're connected to their goals or not. We support them, we address them. And so if we're, again, wanting to change the culture around racism that enters the therapy space, we have to address it. We cannot be silent about it. I actually wrote a blog about this particular topic, so you can see I'm very passionate about it. And we need to have more trainings for therapists to understand how to do that. I also want to advocate for having ongoing, like every clinician should, as part of their 20 hours of continuing education, there should be at least 6 hours, 3 to 6 hours that are dedicated to educating themselves about diversity, equity, inclusion, and their work with different cultural groups. I do it. Every time I make sure that my continuing education is diverse, and I'm learning about other cultures or other groups that I don't know or haven't worked with. And if there's some that I have worked with, it's an ongoing, lifelong journey, and we have to do that work. We have to see that as important to our work and as essential part of our practice.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Couple more questions. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, see, I didn't expect something like that. About anything in general?
I don't know.
The best piece of advice that I've received. Okay, I'll channel one of my supervisors. I'll speak particularly around mental health. It's that with clients, you always have an opportunity to go back. So if you make a mistake, there's more than likely an opportunity to go back and address that. So I say that in this work is really important because when we enter conversations that feel challenging, particularly around race and racism, people tend to be quiet. And I'm often in spaces where I see the people of color speaking up and trying to understand, and the white folk kind of staying quiet. And so my thing is like, it's okay to make a mistake in this space. Like, you learn when you make a mistake, but if you keep quiet, you come and you leave, you don't grow, you don't learn anything, you don't challenge your thinking. So mistakes happen, and people know if you make a genuine mistake versus you're being overtly racist, right? People get that. And so it's important to step up into those conversations and not be quiet. We need to hear your voices.
That's really helpful. And I think that the fear of making a mistake, particularly on the topic of race, is paralyzing for a lot of people, particularly white people, obviously. So I think that's a very helpful perspective.
Yeah.
I have one more question. If we were to remember one thing about tonight, what should it be?
We have to disrupt the juvenile justice system. It is not working for youth of color. And it's, again, we see it, you go to the courts. I know we can't necessarily, random people can't walk into a courtroom, but you go to prison, it's people of color and youth of color overrepresented. And if we're saying adolescents have growing, developing brains, how can we use that science to really direct how we treat and how we address juvenile issues, right? How do we not just continue to do the same thing and say, well, what are we going to do? So I hope that you leave with this saying, I have to disrupt it. I have to disrupt it. I may not have the answer, or there's one thing I can do every day to help to bring the system down, to challenge the system and to reform the system to make it work for all youth.
Thank you. I recently heard someone smart say, and I can't credit because I missed the first part of who it was, but they said, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something.
Yes, there's a James Baldwin quote that I often use. Nothing can be changed. I'm going to mess it up. Nothing can be changed until it's faced. Not everything can be changed. Something to that effect. But you have to face it. You can't change if you don't face it. And it starts there.
Thank you so much. That is all I have for questions. I found your remarks incredibly helpful and insightful, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback. We also really appreciate all of the work that you're doing and advocacy for children and families, and for this really important dialogue. We so appreciate it. So as we approach the end of the evening, can you believe it? We're almost there. We have some final remarks from one of our board members, Michael LaFleur. Mike was unable to be with us live, but he did record a brief message. So we're going to play that for you.
Good evening. I'm Mike LaFleur, and I'm a member of the board here at ACS. Thank you to all of you for attending this virtual 2020 edition of our Heal, Grow, and Thrive event. And thank you to Dr. Jackman for your wonderful keynote address. I'd especially like to thank those of you who have already donated to support the critical work of ACS and its staff. The work of ACS, providing crucial mental health services to court-involved youths throughout Middlesex County at no cost to their families, is more important than ever. And your private donations are what help to make that happen. because of those private donations, which go directly to the programmatic services that our staff provides. The counseling can continue for months, sometimes even years after the court case that brought the child into contact with ACS is over with. And that is just absolutely crucial. I am a member of the ACS board, and I donate to this organization because I personally benefited from ACS services. And those services really were crucial to my life. I can speak also from the professional point of view, having worked as a prosecutor in Suffolk County and now as an assistant attorney general in the office of the attorney general, that the services that ACS provides to the court system are really irreplaceable. And your donations help that crucial mission and that crucial effort. So thank you again to those of you who have already so generously donated. And those of you who have not yet donated, I ask that you please consider doing so. If you could visit, if you are willing to donate, we would, of course, be most grateful to you. And you can do that now in this new virtual world by simply visiting our website, acskids.org, and making a donation there. So thank you again to all of you for joining us here tonight. Thank you to those of you who have already donated to ACS and its staff. And thank you to those of you who might consider donating to ACS. Thank you and good night.
And a virtual thank you to Michael for those remarks. Believe it or not, we have actually reached the end of our evening, even a little bit early. You can get back to your evenings. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really couldn't do this work without you. Please feel free to reach out to me or anyone else at ACS if you would like more information, if you have any questions. As Michael had said, our contact information is on our website, which is acskids.org. And on that note, I'm going to say, stay safe and good night.